Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Heather and I'm a character designer for animation. Today's video is about my astrologer project again, and we're going to be working on my cat character. As you can see, I've already roughed out my pose ideas. Please do not mind that absolute goblin pose in the bottom. We're going to get to her and change almost everything. Sometimes I just don't really know what I'm doing, and now you can see it. This second sketch pass is crucial for me before I go to inking. As you can see, I have the gesture and rough shapes figured out in this first pass, but I'm still missing a lot of information that will allow me to be more confident and quick in the line art stage. Once in a blue moon, I can go from sketch to line, but it really depends on the style that I'm going for. And in this case, it is not gonna happen. I made that mistake when I was drawing poses for the dog character and ended up crashing out, so there will be no dog video, but I will need to update his expressions and the pose in the lineup, so maybe I can record some of that to make up for it. I really like her head in this one and how I can feel the volume. When I first drew her last year, I didn't have as strong an understanding of her shapes as I should have had, and it made redrawing her pretty difficult. So going into these, I knew that that was something that I needed to figure out. What ended up working best for me was to think of the main mass of her head as this jube-esque shape and to build the cheek fur and ears off of that. I briefly toy with the idea of changing up her dress so that the bottom is just solid and there's an apron over top, but ultimately I stick with her original design, and the one big change that I do make is I shorten the length of the dress. It was a pain with posing because I'd either have her feet hidden all the time or I'd have to draw her hiking it up, and character-wise, it didn't really make sense for this kid character who's running around and playing and climbing to have to be worrying about all this extra fabric. I think it's safe to say that she's my favorite of the three, but I was really nervous about drawing these poses. I'm not the best when it comes to drapery. You can see that I very much avoid drawing billowy dresses and lots of fabric, and if I'm being honest, I didn't get better at drawing clothes until the last couple of years, I'd say. I just kind of had enough is enough of all the tight clothing or feeling limited in what I could draw, and I put myself through some boot camp, and it really paid off. So yeah, I knew this was going to be a challenge, and ultimately it was worth it in the end. That said, if you excel at drapery and flowing fabric, please do not be pained by some of the decisions that I'm going to be making. I will fix some of them by the end, some, but not all. Drawing is a lifelong learning process, and this is better than I would have done a year ago or even 5 months ago, so I will take my little wins. I really want to incorporate props more into these drawings. I'm definitely guilty of drawing characters in a void with a hip tilt and a hand up, so I wanted to challenge myself in that regard. Props can act as an extension of your character, giving the viewer a lot more insight into their personality. The hedgehog has his hat, the dog has his snacks, and she has her books. And then the three of them have these little stars that are these cute and fun little extra characters in this world. I feel like I'm cheating character interaction because they're so small and dinky, but I really like them and they're cute, so I'm not mad. Because she's sitting or standing in most of these poses, I knew that I needed something with higher energy to round out the page and better show the range of her character in motion. She has a sort of prissy and judgy vibe, but in reality, she's not afraid to run around and get messy. I think she likes the idea of being proper and sophisticated, but she likes running around and getting messy a little bit more and going against what's expected of her. She has a little attitude and doesn't like to be put in a box. Anyway, regarding this pose in particular, I find running poses to be a little bit challenging, especially when there's all this torque and twist. It's just not my strong suit. When I tell you that I struggle with torso twists, I struggle with torso twists. But they make poses look a lot more interesting, so I am trying. I put this pose off for a while because I wasn't really sure about what I wanted, and I had that really awkward, like, hulking pose. I don't know what she was doing. It was very aggressive looking and clunky, and she's not a very clunky character, so I just had to rework it a few times until I found her personality kind of shining through this pose and to have a bit more curiosity and innocence with her interaction with this little star character. Inking time. There's something about her eye shape that I found a little bit challenging, in addition to the fact that I already find it hard to situate the eyes within the skull. Some artists make it look super easy. I don't find it super easy. I wish it was, but here we are. We all excel and struggle with different things. But I really hope it clicks for me someday. That would be great. If you watched my pig video, I briefly talked about how I love how this brush looks, but I absolutely loathe drawing with it. After I finished these, I fiddled with some of Kyle's brushes. I'll put some screenshots up, and I came up with something pretty similar to this one that I've enjoyed scribbling around with. It doesn't perform exactly the same, but I can take the trade-off. I'll likely use both of them going forward. These characters have a very rounded, volumetric quality to them. I usually draw a little bit more graphically, so it's nice to work on these and go for something a little bit different. As I'm drawing these different parts of her body, I'm really trying to make everything structurally sound. I don't want any part of her to feel flat. So I'm mentally drawing through her shapes, even though I've kind of figured those out in the earlier sketch stages. I'm thinking about how that form goes all the way around. So the curves on her dress are clearly wrapping around, her arms feel solid, so on. And regarding incorporating some life and movement into these more stationary poses, I'm making sure to work in tilts and subtle movement where I can. There is a subtle S-curve to this pose, a nice tilt to her head that's a little bit up and to the side, overlap in her arms, some angle to the feet, and a little bit of movement in the bottom of the dress where I've flicked up the ends a bit. All of these elements help to make the pose a little bit more interesting to look at. I think if I were to change anything, I would potentially move the tail to have it wrap around behind her body, but I'm okay with where it is now. You might notice for a split second that I have her face mask and features colored in. I didn't know if I wanted this to just be line art or to have some tones, which would later be set to multiply to bring in that paper texture background that I have, but ultimately I didn't like how it looked, so you're not going to see that going forward. I really like the head tilt in this one as well. I think I have a better handle on neutral and upward tilted heads, as opposed to downward tilted ones. And that doesn't apply just to this character, that is a general statement. There's something about the way that the features get compressed and how they overlap, as well as how much of the top of the head that you see, that just gives me a little bit of a hard time. I know I need to dedicate more study time to that, and hopefully one day it will click for me. Like, I would love for it to become something that I just draw without needing to give it much thought. As in, it just becomes second nature, like, the character's looking down, done. But right now it's a very involved process. Something about this pose makes me think of Belle from Beauty and the Beast. I think it's the wind blowing through her dress, and she's holding these books, and there's something, I don't know, something about her attitude. I like it. Speaking of books, I'm very grateful for all the books that I've had to draw on shows that I've been on. I think this is exactly the same way I would have drawn them on a couple productions. In the poses where she's holding things close to her, I found it to be a little bit tricky sometimes to avoid tangents and a lack of clarity. There's just so many converging lines and things going on with her fingers and the cuffs of her sleeves, especially if it's over top of her dress, and then I have these stars and these books. It took some figuring out and zhuzhing my lines around, but eventually I figure things out. But if you can see me struggling at any point, that's just something that I'm trying to keep in mind as I draw. I love drawing these stars. They feel like a reward after drawing these significantly more complicated characters. Originally, I thought I'd only include them in the hedgehogs poses, but I'm glad I worked them into the cats and dogs sheets. I did change her leg position at some point. I believe I had them reversed, and it didn't look quite right, so I swapped them, and I think this looks a lot better. I wish I didn't go so heavy-handed with my lines on this one. I have a really hard time achieving my ideal line weight with this brush in regards to the thick and thin and tapering. So I ended up going a little bit overkill on the overlapping areas and the general outline. And I think it really flattened her and made her look a little bit like a sticker. I did try to soften it a bit off camera later, and it did help some in the end, but it's still not perfect. But I'm not going to reline any of these, so it is what it is. Her puff sleeves caused me a bit of grief at times, as they always tend to do if they're not just a ball or a double bump sort of situation. Maybe I could have redesigned it, but I do like this shape when I can draw it decently, so yeah. I definitely made some odd choices with the piece between the main puff and the rest of her sleeve, like that little band. It breaks the form and perspective sometimes. I don't know what I was doing, but yeah, it's odd every now and then. Now, I've forgotten to draw that little patch on her dress in all of these, but I will do that off camera later. I sneakily changed her face a few times here. I still don't love the final, but I think it's better than the previous attempts. I don't know. I need to practice. I feel like I've been spending most of my spare time editing lately rather than drawing, so I am itching to get pen to paper. On the bright side, discussing these weak points with you guys has been pretty helpful, especially when I start noticing that I'm bringing up the same point over and over again. Like, I think I talk about head angles 4 times and I had to cut it out. It's only a 15-minute video, if that, and I can't have the main focus be, oh, I can't draw heads. But yeah, I struggle with heads. Gotta draw more. I really like drawing these characters' hands. I established a rule in my style guide that they would all have these very rounded, chubby digits. They're considerably easier to draw than a realistic hand, and I liked that. They're also very satisfying to shade because of that nice chunky shape. Not that I'm going to be shading any of these, but when I was working on the pig and future characters that I'm going to draw, I always look forward to that moment. This hand here though, I didn't like, so I scooched it up a little bit and I redrew some of the lines that are a little bit flat and I made them follow the arc of her arm better. I started adding some little imperfections to her fur in this one because it's a fairly high energy pose, and I established in my expressions that certain emotions or scenario can make her fur bristle a little bit like a Ghibli character. And I'll throw a couple of those expressions up here so you can see what I'm talking about. I treated her fur like this in the angry expression as well as the kind of shocked, fearful, taken aback face. Imagine I didn't redraw this one. Let me refresh your memory as to how this originally looked. I think I made the right call. This pose ends up having one of the weaker heads. As I said earlier, I do struggle once we go south of neutral when it comes to heads. I also lost a bit of volume and thickness across the pose, but I've learned what's best for me sometimes is to just accept things as they are and move on. I'm going to learn more from drawing many new things than I will from overworking a drawing to death and making it an unpleasant experience. At the end of the day, this is just my personal work, so I do have some freedom. Something to consider if you want a little more life in your characters' faces is to incorporate some opposing or contrasting angles. Now, not every expression you draw needs this, everything in moderation, of course, but when used appropriately, it can help emphasize your expressions and up the appeal. I did this very subtly in these poses because they're fairly relaxed and bordering on neutral, but I did push this concept more in my expression sheets, so I'll show you a few examples. So yeah, here are my cat expressions. There's a nice mix of expressiveness across the board. Some of them are fairly restrained while others are more broad, and you can see that her eyes also stretch and squash in every pose as well. Take note of the angle of her eyebrows compared to her mouth and the more expressive faces. There's this sort of arc that's happening as we travel down her face. I did include this in my style guide, so I'll show you that as well, but you can find a lot of resources on Pinterest, and I remember seeing things on Tumblr back in the day. Yeah, tons of resources out there. You can also pause while you're watching a movie or show or look at some screenshots and analyze expressions that other people have drawn. Figure out what draws you to them and makes them so successful, and then do some studies. I like to start with some direct copies and then I apply the principle to another character. Because this is just line art, I don't want to put a ground shadow there, but I also don't want them floating in space, so I'm drawing some little indications of a ground surface. It took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out this grass underneath her, so I have edited that out and now it looks like it was easy. And it wasn't. All done. I definitely went back and changed some things. I don't really remember what I did right now apart from changing some of the line weight because I went a little bit too heavy-handed in a couple areas and I do regret that, but I'm not about to reline any of this, so yeah, it's done, it's done. Life moves on and it's time to draw some other things. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how these turned out. I know that I still have a lot of room for improvement when it comes to dynamic posing and torso twists and obviously dresses and drapery, but I'm glad that I did this. I don't know what else to add to this, so thank you for watching and stay tuned for the next video. Bye!